Hello and welcome to an extraordinary session of Digital Futures. Today is very special for two reasons. Firstly, the Venice Biennale opened this week, and this will be the subject of our session today. I'm delighted to have Philip Beasley here with his team, who will be presenting some of their work on living architecture, both from Venice and spanning the globe, as it were, which will be a remarkable feat in itself. That will be the main feature, but it's also the week on which we've put together our workshops for Inclusive Future. And I just want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about that. We will come back to this at the end of the session to go and answer questions any mate might have about registration for this thing. So just for those who haven't noticed, this is the most extraordinary thing. We have a festival of workshops that is going to call Inclusive Future, and it is truly inclusive this year. Last year we had 80 workshops in I think four different languages. This year we've got over 100, probably 110 or so, or maybe 120 workshops in many different languages. Just to take the example of AI, we have 17 different workshops in AI, and those are going to be conducted in English, Spanish, Chinese, Farsi, Turkish, Russian, and I think Portuguese. An astonishing array of workshops. These workshops we'll talk more about later, but they will be taking place between the 26th of June and the 3rd of July. But the whole event opens with the Digital Consortium doctoral platform, where for the first time we are opening up a space for doctoral students across the world to come together to learn together. It no longer makes any sense to have one professor in one classroom talking to a single group of students when we can all share a platform. And this is going to be a remarkable thing. We're going to kick off with the rock star of philosophy today, Slavoj Žižek, who will be giving a lecture to kick the whole thing off, which will be truly astonishing. Those of you who don't know him, well, he is so well known. He literally is a kind of rock star within the field of cultural studies and philosophy. Then we have three different lecture series. One on architectural theory and philosophy that's going to include Sanford Quinter, Manuel Delander, Erin Manning, myself, and a few others, Patrick Schumacher. Alongside that, there will be a course on what I'm calling the Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence, and that's going to be an introductory course on artificial intelligence. And there's also going to be a series on performative design that Philip Yuan is organizing, and that'll include people like Philip Bloch, Aki Menges, Meta Thompson, and so on. It is going to be a remarkable festival. The places on the Zoom will be open for doctoral students and would-be doctoral students, and maybe some who've just graduated as doctoral students. And we'll also be live streaming that. And then finally, there's also the international conference that will be taking place this summer. This is going to be an astonishing festival. We had 12,000 applications last year. We're anticipating many, many more this year, and we're being inclusive. We're doing it in many different languages. I'm delighted that we have Ahmed, who's representing Africa, who's bringing in a series of workshops in Africa. We have Maria now on board, who's doing a series of workshops in Russia. And we have Aya, who has been looking after the Middle East. They are literally going to be all over the world, and they are going to be inclusive. I'm really delighted by this. And finally, just to say, we will talk about this more. Registration opens on May the 23rd. That is tomorrow. That is at the same time as now. Now, don't worry, don't rush. Some of the workshops won't be there. And the point is that you have until May the 31st to select your three workshops of choice. And so you don't have to sign up until May the 31st, and then hopefully you will get your choice workshop. I should say, alongside that, there are a series of other workshops. Everything is going to be live streamed, or at least most of the workshops are going to be live streamed, and they're going to be a series of large workshops that are going to be that everyone can access. I'm doing one myself called "Really?" with Sanford Quinter, Marina Rodriguez des Neves, and Victoria Barbo, and that's going to be amazing. So this is going to be a very, very special event. Anyway, for today, let me stop sharing my screen and let me welcome Philip Beasley, who is going to be chairing the session today. Philip is one of the few people who isn't in Venice. I'm in Venice, but Venice, California, so the wrong Venice. Philip is still in Canada. But it's wonderful to see Philip. I meet Philip all over the world. I remember one memorable moment in New Zealand when we went into the kind of Lord of the Rings territory to go and look at the ferns there. And of course, Philip had uh, uh, a fantastic installation going on in New Zealand, as he does in Venice at the moment, with some kind of, shall we say, synthetic ferns. So I'd like to welcome Philip. It's wonderful to have Philip supporting us so many times on this platform. Really a committed supporter of Digital Futures and a wonderful designer and person in his own right. So welcome, Philip.
Neil, thank you so very much for gathering us all together today. And this is a day of celebrating the opening for the Biennale of Architecture in Venice with Hashim Sarkis's extraordinary, compelling question, how will we live together? It's a question that needs optimism, and yet it needs reality too, with the kind of problems and the suffering that is all around us. And so I hope that this panel can contribute some open-eyed confidence that embraces the problems and creates really practical and spiritual and conceptual possibilities for architecture. The people that are with me on this panel are my absolute heroes. I'm so absolutely honored that you have agreed to join me. Nicola Cazas, David Benjamin, Daniela Tiziano, Salvador, your work is important and is giving a fundamental contribution to architecture and to the transformations of our planet. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I'm saying that, because you are so deeply active and so materially rich and fertile in the work that we can say that this work needs to contribute to its transformation. I'm going to just run very quickly through some bios, just to introduce each person in turn. Nicola Cazas is an Italian architect and professor. He's a founder of Nicola Cazas Architecture, and he's at RISD as a faculty member and a PhD candidate at the Bartlett. And he is, of course, presenting his work for the Italian Pavilion at the Biennale of Architecture in an extraordinary collaboration with Parley from the Oceans and Nagami, the 3D printing company. His work spans from architecture to couture to fashion and technology, collaborating with fashion designer Iris van Herpen, Anouk Wipprecht, Cirque du Soleil, Volkswagen, BMW, and his professorship at the Accademia di Belle Arti in Bologna expands his influence now. I can say that I know of Nicola as a profoundly beautiful and talented and sensitive designer, and an absolute hero in some of the work that he's produced. It's had a very important influence on me personally. David Benjamin is the founder and leader of The Living, an Autodesk studio, which combines research and practice, combining new ideas and technologies, especially through prototyping. And it embraces complexity at the intersection of ideas and technology and material and cultures and humans and non-humans and environment itself. Just a really extraordinary kind of synthetic range, particularly at the intersection of biology and computation and sustainability. There are three frameworks that the studio has offered: harnessing living organisms for architecture and working with biocomputing, biosensing, and biomanufacturing. I should say that David's work is known perhaps for its iconic work in 2014 for MoMA's PS1, where Hi-Fi, the extraordinary Mycelium building, is something that has caused a whole movement in architecture, in tissue engineering, and in the sense of renewable material, a fundamental contributor to architectural culture. Vienna and Zurich-based media artists and architects Daniela Milteberger and Tiziano Derme are the co-founders and directors of MADE, the Bureau for Architecture and Transmediale Kunst, an interdisciplinary design studio created to critically locating new technologies within novel human-animal machine entanglements. Their work strives to establish particular relationships with otherness and new dynamics of exchange between listeners and receivers. Daniela is a PhD fellow at ETH Zurich, and Tiziano is an assistant professor and a PhD fellow at Innsbruck. And I think we're going to be seeing some material directly from the Biennale, where we see an absolutely extraordinary kind of new synthetic soil. I've had the honor of exhibiting side by side with Daniela and Tiziano, and I'm absolutely inspired by their work. It's an honor to be with you. Salvador Breed, my dear beloved collaborator, is with me today. Salvador Breed creates and sculpts sound and technology for a wide field of contexts: live performances, fashion shows, video art, interactive art installations. The Dutch artist preoccupies himself with the way acoustics and natural ambience and silence and space all enrich each other, using subtle means to expand our notions of listening, experiencing, and sensing. Breed is considered really a choreographer of sound, as well as a composer, and he acts in ways that allows even the most discordant sounds to work together, heightening fleeting moments, the most sensitive, the most subtle dimensions. And he co-founded 4D Sound Technologies in 2007, and he served as its creative director, which blends boundaries between music and sound design using spatial sound technologies in the creative industry. So this is our panel, and I want to suggest that we are focusing on two fundamental questions. One, again, Hashim Sarkis's beautiful question: how will we live together? And the second parallel one is perhaps the question of living architecture. Perhaps we can say that the boundary between architecture and life, rather than being split in the humanist Western tradition, where it was safe to make walls and stripped stages and leave the living for other beings, for ourselves. These boundaries are so deeply interwoven today that perhaps it is time to start using the term living architecture as a discipline in its own right. I hope this panel can be a contribution to this. Nicola.
Hello. Let me just share my screen. So first of all,
so we're just waiting for Nicola to come back. I'm sure that he'll be back with us in a minute. We're just going to hold on because I see that Nicola has lost the signal. I wonder whether it would be okay if we just make a shift while we do a reset, and sure. Perhaps if Daniela and Tiziano, would you be okay with sharing your work now?
Sure.
Sure. Thanks for this really beautiful introduction, Philip. If you hear some weird background noises, it's because we are sitting directly at the Arsenale right now in the top floor. And I think it's your piece, Philip, that is playing right now. So excuse the side noises. This is really from that we are on site. We will also, we thought that it would be great. We give you a quick intro to our project. Magic Queen that we're actually exhibiting here at the Arsenale next to Philip, which is a huge pleasure and a huge honor. And we then thought it would be good if we just go with the camera down and show you some live streaming from the Arsenale, that you have the feeling you're physically almost present, at least as a virtual avatar. I will share my screen now just to give you a short introduction to the Magic Queen, to show you not just the theoretical background, but also the fabrication background, and to also explain you a bit the main thoughts that were behind this project. Let me just start sharing. Perfect. I hope you can see it now. Let me just reshare with better settings. Yeah, that's okay. All right. Can you see it? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So our office is called MATE. We are an office for architecture and transmedia art from Vienna. And as Philip very kindly introduced us, and even though our work is quite broad, we are always circulating around this idea of nature, technology, animals, and other non-human subjects as well as humans. And the project that we want to show you today, Tiziano and I, is who's sitting next to me. So if I look to the right, it's because I'm we are sitting next to each other. Is the Magic Queen that you can actually see here. The Magic Queen is a soil 3D printed architecture. It's a prototypical architecture where we really tried to create an environment. It talks a lot about different things. First thing, it talks about how can we fabricate architecture that is completely 100% biodegradable. So this piece that you can see here is coming from the garden, so it's normal soil, and is going back to the garden after the exhibition. And everything was produced on site in Venice, and Tiziano will then give a quick intro on how it was fabricated. So we always say it's kind of like the two sides of the coin, where once is the fabrication, which we take quite serious to also be fully biodegradable. And the second one is the inhabitation that is happening right now, where the robot that is fabricating the structure actually then becomes part of the structure. And the whole idea is to create this hybrid garden where all elements depend on each other, which means the robot is scanning the environment now, is creating a sound that is filling the room by observing and tracking different elements on the structure, changes in the structure, and the structure will grow over time. So there are actually seeds inside. You can already see some mushrooms growing, and the structure will change in these 6 months. And as the structure will change, the sound will change and the visuals will change. So the idea is to create really an environment that is depending on all elements, and you cannot take anything out anymore without making the whole environment not work anymore. And this was something that we tried the first time in a very big scale with a lot of different tools. Here you see another picture of the installation itself. So it's a 90 tons of soil with a robot from the ceiling that is actually carrying and scanning the structure. It's also watering the structure. And parallel also a projection on the other side that is actually showing what the robot sees, that we will quickly show and introduce later. Tiziano, I give the word to you, and you can give some quick insights on how we fabricated it, because there's a whole story that of course when the final piece is here, it's hard to see, and we are happy to share some of these insights actually today. Tiziano?
Thank you, Daniela, for the intro. And yeah, of course, like Daniela mentioned, the Magic Queen, the structure was built in situ along 3 months. Basically, we had two robots standing there in the Arsenale and trying to basically articulating and calibrating the whole production of the structure. So then, like Daniela mentioned, the project as this kind of technical milieu that is placed within the introduction of biotechnologies into architecture, which is a topic that is very dear to us. And the question is, of course, how we can integrate those technologies and weave those technologies with robotic fabrication, perhaps. So soil 3D printing perhaps is a technology that we presented officially in Acadia last 2 years ago, yeah, in Texas. It's an interesting technology because it's a very similar process to binder jetting, which is it's an additive manufacturing process we all know, with the difference that it is using an organic material, an organic granule material that is tuned to host and nourish life. So this idea, falls into the domain of how can we really pass from materials to substrates, perhaps. How materials can enhance and enable life. This could be, of course, a kind of point that we can for sure discuss in reference to one of the Philip questions. So how can architecture, how can materials enhance and enhance life? The process of 3D printing with soil is quite straightforward. So it's basically a process of very straightforward compaction of soil and binding with a very specific hydrogel we developed along these 2 years. And so basically this process of layering the soil, layering the binder is then repeated until the completion of one of these soil 3D printed modules. So the challenge, of course, with the Magic Queen was of course the scale for us, because this scale was the first time that we approached it through this format, and of course soil is an organic material that is highly volatile, highly sensible to environmental fluctuations such as humidity, temperature, and this is probably one of the constraints that really interest us since the beginning. Daniela?
Yeah, maybe I can continue if it continues playing. Sorry. So as Tiziano was saying, it was printed in parts. And as you can see here, once a part is printed, we actually had to excavate it, which was a very interesting part of the structure, where the elements themselves became an archaeological, almost like an archaeological artifact by their own rights. And so the whole structure was with kind gestures slowly excavated and again on site and placed on site. And it's quite interesting because it also discusses this idea of we give a lot of aesthetic authorship to the material itself, because of course everything was designed digitally and algorithmically, but of course the material itself behaves in a different way, and also depending on how was the humidity during printing, how was the humidity in the room during excavation. All these things, factors actually influence how the final structure looks like, and then the final structure becomes at the same time also a kind of physical artifact of the room and spatial qualities throughout the fabrication. Soil, of course, is also the longer the structure will stand, the harder it will get, and the whole structure will change over time. And that was something that was very interesting for us. That it's really a piece that talks about this idea of decay, growth, and change that is inherent in this material. And as you can see here, so we fabricated the individual parts, we placed them, and we placed the robot hanging from the ceiling of the Arsenale to be able to access as many areas as possible to water and take care and scan these places. So in total, it was a fabrication of 2.5 months, whereas it was everything included from fabricating to placement to post-processing of the structure. Whereas post-processing, we were using a biological binder to actually additionally give some texture to the structure. Where if you see it in person, you will see that it has cracks that come, and this comes because of the specific binder that we are using. Here you can see some final shots of actually the structure in during its time here in Venice. So the whole 6 months, the robot will scan the structure and will generate the sound that that you can hear. And according to what the robot sees, actually the sound changes. And here we have actually a video stream of what is also projected on the site. As you can see here, the robot is equipped with specific sensors to actually analyze the structure. One is the camera to detect features such as humans and cracks and plants and animals. And according to that, the robot releases a different sound. Tiziano?
Of course, like Daniel mentioned, there is a sort of juxtaposition between the nature, this kind of artificial nature the visitor sees, and what the machine sees. So there is a kind of duality between this kind of machining eye and the way how machines are processing informations and the way how we perceive those informations through these different media. In this case, this idea of weaving auditive data with visual data and effectively things we can smell and touch for real. Yeah. Like Daniela mentioned, the robot is equipped with a sensor and that is able to analyze, detect, sort, and gather data from the garden. Data is then sampled and categorized through different categories, such as people, if there is a grass, if there is a crack, or if there's a mushroom, for example. And all those signals are used as a cues for the additive piece.
So this was a very quick overview of the different elements that were important for us while creating and designing this piece. And I would propose that Tiziano, if you can go down, and maybe you give us a few minutes because we have to go from the top down the stairs. And then you will also see actually Philip's piece in the background. You also saw it through the eyes of the robot actually. And this is how we kind of would conclude a bit our presentation of the Magic Queen. So Tiziano is running. I can give you a live update. And it's quite interesting because it's a real interactive piece. That means it comes with all the problems that an interactive piece has, but it also comes with the beauty where it really changes over the period of the time, and depending also not just on the cracking, but also of course on humidity in the room. Yes, so now you see on the IP mate exactly. So here you can see the grass that is already growing in the structure, and it's like not even a week. So we have some additional lights that actually give some extra sunlight as we are in a dark room to the plants. And the pink ones are specific mushrooms that are also guests in our structure. Yes, Virginia, it's perfect. It's big. Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much, Daniela and Tiziano. Nicola, would you like to join us now?
Okay, I'll try again. Try to close Zoom this time. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so first of all, thank you very much, Neil, for organizing this wonderful meeting. And thank you very much, Philip, for the wonderful introduction. Congratulations, Danielle and Tiziano, for your work. It's amazing, really interesting. So truly amazing work, so wonderful. And yeah, my name is Nicola Cazas. I'm an architect. I run a multidisciplinary practice for research and architecture, aiming at combining several fields of specialization so as to offer an innovative and unique vision of the academic discipline and profession. As Philip was anticipating, I've been collaborating with fashion tech, with fashion, haute couture, automotive design, and so on. So I want to start today briefly talking a little bit about haute couture and what I learned with the possibility that I had to collaborate with Iris van Herpen. It happened to me in recent time to receive a few critiques for working with haute couture. You know, they think like, you know, it's haute couture, it's really expensive, it's only for rich people, and so on. And I think that this is really a superficial reading of what haute couture is, especially what haute couture is today. If you look actually at the principle and they are behind haute couture, and we make a comparison with the fashion industry, we see that haute couture is based on on-demand production. It's working on durable materials and textile. It's based on innovation. It's very often craft-made. While the fashion industry mass produce, it produces enormous amount of waste. The dresses have really a short life. It's polluting, is produced with a large employment of machine and so on. So actually, in terms of sustainability, haute couture has actually the closest and environmentally friendly principle. So the problem is having the possibility to democratize the principle that are behind haute couture. And I truly believe, and as I guess Iris van Herpen believe as well, and Philip Beasley, that digital tool can make this step, digitalizing and democratizing through the employment of digital tool, the principle of haute couture. So when I was called more or less 1 year ago and was invited to present the work at the Biennale of Architecture in Venice, it was actually more or less 2 years ago, because then because of the pandemic, we had to postpone the Biennale, as you all know. And at the time, I was reading the book of Greta Thunberg, Our House is on Fire, and there is this sentence that really I found really interesting and had a huge impact on my view of my own discipline. When she was criticized by the journalists for not going to school at the time, she was answering why I should go to school and more or less I go by memory. So why I should go to school and think about my future when there's maybe no future at all. for a human being. And I think that this, as architects and creatives, we should take these words and this consideration really seriously. So while we are thinking or in which way we can think about creativity, art, or even architecture, if there may be no architecture or if there may be no future at all. So when I was invited to the Biennale, I decided to really focus on something that could be environmental important. And my work was already at, again, the principle, as I was explaining before, and was already based on sustainability. But I thought that it was really the time to make a new sustainable turn, let's say, based on the employment and the use of digital tools. So I had the great opportunity to work with Parley for the Oceans. Parley for the Oceans is a global environmental network based on activists, volunteers, creatives, and industry leaders that all together try to find solution on the problems of our oceans. And as all we know, the problem of our oceans are also the problem of human beings. If according to a recent research, the 90% of the water that we drink already contain plastic particles. And so what's, Parley for the Ocean, for those that don't know their platform, their network, really go and check their work, the research, and their actions and initiatives. They're basically, what they do is not only working and doing research on bioplastic and on recycling and recycled plastic, but what is the importance is the connection between intercepted plastic and recycled plastic. That means they actually they intercept plastics from coastal communities, beaches, remote island, even underwater in proximity of the coasts of the beaches and so on. They collect it, and then they clean, they work, and they invented this wonderful premium quality material, which is plastic ocean, plastic ocean, that can be employed in the industry. As you probably know, they have been collaborating with Adidas, with Iris van Herpen, just to see how this new material can enter the industry and also be economically interesting. In our case, so in the case of the Biennale, what we want is to show the possibility to use this new material within the architectural scale. So we decided to create this large sculptural installation that actually has the size of more or less the truck that we had to employ for the delivery, because it was produced in Madrid and delivered in Venice. So actually also the size is based on performance that we had to deliver, because actually it's fine because we designed it in 2 days, we produced, it was 3D printed in 2 days, and it was delivered in 2 days, and it was set up within the Italian pavilion in 2 hours. But actually behind there are more than 10 years of design research and technological research that's create a performance also not only in terms of quality of material, shape, etc., but also of delivery time and delivery production. As Philip was saying, we collaborated with the industry leading 3D company Nagami, that of course they employ robotic 3D printing. And let me see if I can show you a video of how it was created. So again, it was built. Okay, now the internet is a little bit unstable, but you can see a little bit the process, the shape, and it's void inside. And this is our what. In terms of what you see here are actually 200 kilos of intercepted and upcycled and worked through additive manufacturing kilos of plastics. So it's but what we want also it's to create and to think about. So what we want is not to have an architectural project at the Biennale, but to create an architectural initiative. We define it like this because the idea is going from the ocean and working for the ocean. So eventually this piece will help us in raising awareness on the problem of the oceans and making people thinking about the problem of the oceans, but then we're gonna also create an auction, and all the funds that we're gonna raise with through that auction is gonna go to ocean cleaning and the research on bioplastic. And from what concern really quickly an aesthetic point of view, a formal point of view, as you may see, there is a combination of a really organic pattern. It is actually, for those who know, a fractal shape, and one more linear and geometric. So within the context of the Biennale and within the idea of togetherness, this wanted to represent a sort of coexistence of human and natural. So human design, human craftsmanship, and natural shape and organic shapes. Another interesting thing that we realized after 3D printing this piece are all the small imperfections that are emerging that gives this beautiful, even more organic sort of aesthetic and in terms also of performative legs. And these imperfections are wonderful and really gives a deeper meaning to 3D printing, because in the moment it's not only about having the possibility to create mass customized piece, but it's even more because if you try to produce or to 3D print twice the same piece, it's actually going to be different, because those all imperfections are unique and make all the pieces unique and peculiar. Again, this idea of creating a circular processes. I think that as architects and as creatives, we have to think even more about that. It's not only about creating sustainable architecture, but it's about creating sustainable processes and sustainable initiative. The architectural project or the architectural outputs should be only one stage within a circular project process that that needs to become sustainable, needs to activate actions. In our case, was action for the oceans, of course. One last thing that about our installation. While we were talking with Parley for the Ocean, we realized that at the Biennale there are 46 countries, and through a series of collaboration, basically all the countries of the world are participating within the architectural Biennale, but also within the Biennale of Art in Venice. And we found that it would be, as a provocation, but not really as a provocation. It's the time to create a space for having a ocean. So, again, the togetherness, water in terms of sea, ocean, reefs, but even rain are the thing that actually connects all of us. You know, you cannot think about the problem of one section of the ocean related to one country without thinking about the other countries, not only in terms of what happened underwater, but as you all see, also the problem of what happened on the water. So in terms of, again, problem related to immigration and so on. So this is not a discussion that we can have within the frame of one country or one discipline. It's really something that we need to discuss in all together, again, as creative, as activists, as industry leaders, and so on. Just to conclude, the last that I wanted to show is going back to the opening and my work on haute couture and the thing that I was in while starting. It is really, really important to rediscover our tradition. These are perhaps the four most beautiful images that I have of my work, because really represent the relation between human being, human craftsmanship, and digital production. And I think that some of the solution to the problems, not only of course of the oceans, but of human inhabitation, human coexistence with our environment, must emerge from new interpretation and new combination of what is tradition and what is innovation. Thank you.
Nicola, thank you for that absolutely exquisite work and this moving invocation of the ocean's contribution as well. David, would you join us?
Great. Thank you, Philip. And let me share my screen here. First I should say it's really great to be part of the Digital Futures platform and in such great company in this event. And it's very inspiring for me to see the presentations so far from Daniela and Tiziano and Nicola. And then I want to quickly acknowledge the incredible team that I work with. All of the work of my studio is collaborative, and these people individually and collectively literally bring it to life. So in terms of living architecture, I just wanted to note that, of course, architects have been inspired by biology for hundreds of years, but I believe that biology of today is different. It's now possible to grow a cell alone on a glass slide instead of in an organism. It's possible to visualize neurons firing inside of a live animal in real time. It's even possible to cut and paste DNA and bring to life creatures that never before existed, such as, for example, yeast that produces an anti-malaria medicine. And as of just a few years ago, with the demonstration of CRISPR and gene drives, it's now possible to redesign or even eliminate an entire species very quickly, essentially molding evolution itself. In addition, it's now possible to apply the latest techniques of computation, or digital futures, we could say, such as computer vision and machine learning, apply those to processes such as biological growth. Of course, biological functions involve hundreds of dimensions, but if they can be simulated in a computer model, then they can become a more actionable part of the design process. Yet, the more you learn about biology, at least from my perspective, the more you see how complex biology is and how much we still have to learn about it. And in this sense, design with biology may involve design with a black box, design with forces beyond our complete control, and design with uncertainty. I believe this new version of biology calls for a new method of design, And in this inspiring context of living architecture organized by Neil Leach and Philip Beasley, I would like to describe 3 of our recent experiments with living materials. So the first one is an approach that Philip already mentioned for an installation at MoMA PS1 in New York City a few years ago. And in this case, we started with a living organism called Mycelium. It's the branching root-like structure of mushrooms. You can see it here, growing in these thin white filaments. It creates these incredible forms. But we were interested not so much in the formal potential of this material, but in its function, because you can combine mycelium with agricultural waste, not the high value part of agriculture, such as corn kernels, but the low value part of agriculture, corn stover, chopped up corn stalks. You combine those 2 things, mycelium and agricultural waste, in a mold of almost any shape. And in just about a week or so, it grows into a solid object. So we were very interested in this as a new kind of living material. It's being explored for things like packaging. And our idea was to see if we could create a new kind of architectural building block out of this material. In other words, to create a new load-bearing architectural brick with almost no waste, carbon emissions, or embodied energy, and that's made through a living material. This is what we set out to do as a kind of test of this new material, this new way of making things, and to explore what kinds of architectural environments we might create out of it. This was a temporary installation outdoors in the courtyard of MoMA PS1. And we thought of it as a kind of medium scale test of the new possibilities. So it was about 13 meters tall, more than 1 floor of a building. It involved 10,000 bricks, so more than just a few objects, on a lab bench. Here you can see this, the completed installation in the context of the glass and steel buildings of Manhattan in the background, and the traditional red clay brick materials of MoMA PS1, framing the environment, an experience of being inside of this new kind of architecture made of a living material, with the qualities of light and shadow and foreground and background and views, the kind of architectural experience as much as the kind of technical experiment of making this thing stand up. And we tested it out in society and culture through events that took place in the courtyard over the summer. Perhaps most importantly, at the end of the summer, we disassembled the structure, took the bricks and crumbled them into smaller pieces, combined them with other organisms in terms of bacteria and worms in a compost site. And in just about 60 days, the physical matter of the building, the living material, was transformed. It turned into high quality soil through composting, which we in turn used for New York City tree planting and also community gardens in New York City, essentially kind of testing out and showing that this example of a living material is non-toxic enough to eat. In another project that I want to describe, which could be called kind of the chapter 2 of our experiments with living materials, we tried to use, in some ways, the same material, but go a step further. So in other words, with our Hi-Fi project for PS1, our bricks were alive during their formation, but then we dried them out and they became dead, inert, and predictable during construction and occupation, just like traditional materials, like wood, for example. But what if the bricks were not dried out and if the material did not become dead and inert? What if building materials were literally alive? Would they have some of the properties of other living organisms, like self-healing or self-attaching or growing? And this is an idea that we had thought about back when we did PS1. and wanted to experiment with, but kind of dialed it back a little bit. And then later, just a couple of years ago, we found the opportunity to do the next round of experimentation for an installation at the Pompidou Center in Paris. And more specifically, we started experimenting with growing new units of mycelium material and placing them next to each other when they were still growing and alive. And we quickly saw that we were able to achieve what we now call biowelding. So these living units, these living materials, living blocks of material can fuse together. And we have essentially brick and mortar in the same physical object. And this time-lapse video gives you a sense of how it works. Over a couple of days, you see these blocks kind of fusing together. And this was exciting for us. It suggested a whole range of experiments. I'll show a couple of them really quickly. In the first experiment, we were interested in combining biowelding with the process that we call Voxel 3D printing. The key here is that you're using a kind of fabrication process to place voxels, in this case spheres, but it's essential to note that we have two different kinds of spheres. We have wood spheres and mycelium spheres. And we can use those strategically because wood spheres don't fuse to other wood spheres, but wood spheres fuse to mycelium spheres. And of course, mycelium spheres fuse to mycelium spheres. So we have a number of different relationships in an overall structure of just a bunch of voxels placed next together. And we can use a kind of scaffolding of wood units to build up a structure of mycelium and wood units, just depending on the placement of the units, and then of course on this biowelding process that I described. So you can see here how we created this test, just a small model scale test of what we might later apply, through some of the amazing techniques we just saw earlier in the presentation, through kind of robotic fabrication. We might be able to apply this on a larger architectural scale. But then we had another idea as well. We were interested in combining biowelding with a different process that's called material jamming. So jamming is essentially the material effect that occurs when some kind of units or grains are poured on top of one another. So I'm sure everyone recognizes this photo of a pile of sand. But it's interesting to note that if the grains of sand have a certain shape, for example, if they're spherical, then you'll get a kind of shallower pile or mound of material. But if the grains of sand are more angular or have other kinds of geometric shapes, you could get a slightly taller pile. And for example, if the grains have a forked shape, so really specific geometry of the individual units, you might be able to get really interesting shapes. For example, just pouring bricks and creating a wall, even without formwork. Kind of a wild idea. And we didn't quite do that, but I'll show you what we did. We were interested in some studies of jamming in agriculture, actually, about how a funnel or a grain silo can get clogged. It's basically about the relationship between the formwork or the funnel, the container, and the size and shape of the units. So here you can see like a funnel working well and a funnel that's not working well. So sometimes they get clogs. There's a whole material science exploration of how to avoid clogging in grain silos like this image you see on the right. But we thought, hey, that shape on the right is actually really interesting. And what if we wanted to purposely create that shape to explore some new ideas for architecture? So as usual, we did a huge amount of material experiments. Here are a couple of the different mold shapes, unit shapes we were experimenting with, and biowelding shapes. And then we also experimented with different ways to form more or less a funnel, a kind of calibrated shape of a funnel, where we're angling two different planes, thinking of how to pour the units either through the center or toward the sides, and trying to see what kind of clogging or jamming we could get. In this case, using all the same size and shape of units, but just looking at the testing the geometry of the funnel or the container, as well as the way we're pouring units. And this led us to some interesting hypotheses about how we might be able to create something really interesting and architectural if we scaled it up. And at this point, we turned to testing at a different scale. Sorry, I missed one thing here in between scale. I'm going to go back here and see if I can. Oops. Oh, I'm going to skip the quarter scale test, but we then used this approach to go on site in Paris to see if we could create more or less an arch through biowelding with this living material and material jamming. So we're scaling up from what you saw as just kind of a desktop experiment and pouring these little units and changing the plexiglass shapes and thinking of, could we do that at an architecture scale? So we started by growing a bunch of mycelium units, living material blocks that were in the shape of a bucket, taking them on site to the museum in Paris, growing them just the right amount. So this is a living material, has to be treated kind of carefully, and time is so critical with the living material. Then we built a large formwork to basically create a giant funnel. Here are the units. We took them out of their containers at just the right time. They're still living at this point. We built the formwork and started pouring the units into the formwork step by step. They're actually very heavy at this scale. And you see this is about 4 meters tall. So again, a kind of prototype of architecture scale. Now this moment is critical. We're basically removing the bottom of the funnel, the plug at the bottom of the funnel. And if things go right at this point, some of the units at the bottom should be much looser based on the jamming effect, and we should be able to kind of just easily shake them out. But some of the units toward the top are going to be much more tightly packed, and you won't be able to kind of pull them out. And we did, in fact, get a small arch with this effect. Then we let the material grow for another 5 days and bioweld. And now here's another critical moment of the experiment. You know, we had never done this at this scale before, so this was a little nervous for us. And we removed the formwork. And in essence, we should have basically an arch of material created through biowelding and jamming. Actually, first jamming, and then the second phase of biowelding to get a structure that's you know, somewhat deliberate, but also somewhat uncontrolled, somewhat due to the randomness of pouring and jamming as material effects. So we were designing with a range of possibilities that we knew and controlled just enough, but the exact outcome was somewhat emergent. Here are a couple more views. And finally, what I'd like to show as our latest round of experiments in material research with living materials has led us to a line of thinking that basically allows us to see how all materials, you know, organic materials like mycelium materials, but really all materials, even concrete or steel or plastics, all materials, organic materials and non-organic materials, are actually literally alive, and they always have been. And this is because materials are teeming with invisible microbes. So for our project for the Venice Biennale, we wanted to experiment with what this could mean for buildings and cities. And so this is kind of our original hypothesis in a kind of 30-second clip. Thinking about the invisible microbes that are not only on architecture, that not only make materials living, but are also within us as humans and other non-human organisms. And how can we address this theme of living together, as Philip beautifully described, through this kind of thinking? So in one way, this was a project that's a continuation of our work on living materials. And in another way, this is a project that began with a slightly different track, which was with new ideas about ecosystems and public health and the intersection of biology and cities. So in other words, as I already mentioned, microbes are everywhere, invisible to the human eye. They live within the air, within the walls, and on even the cleanest of surfaces. And we have always lived together with microbes, the vast majority of them contributing to our survival and our well-being. The human body has more microbial cells than human cells. And although a few types of bacteria and viruses can make it sick, It's never been more relevant than now during the pandemic. It's really important to note that many other types of bacteria actually defend us and limit the effects of harmful ones. Bacteria in the human gut help us digest food. Viral DNA in humans helps us process and store memories. And from this perspective, each of us is a metropolis teeming with life. And like the residents of a city that contribute to its culture and make it run, the microbes of the human body contribute to its vitality and give it energy and personality. In other words, microbes help make us who we are. As I'm describing this project, each of you will shed 2.5 million bacteria, breathing them out, shedding them from your skin and hair. Most of them will die. And the ones that survive in our typical architectural environments actually tend to be the ones that have antibiotic resistance and enhanced virulence, the ones that are most harmful to humans. Yet, in environments with high diversity of microbial life, the harmful organisms tend to be outweighed and mitigated by the benign ones. So what if we could change our architectural environments to be better hosts for a diversity of microbes and to decrease the amount of harmful ones? In this vision of the future of architecture, the buildings could include spaces for both humans and microbes. Buildings could be designed as microbial environments. Rooms could have different microclimates for many types of microbes. Equipment for heating, ventilation, and cooling could be supplemented by microbial reservoirs. Materials themselves could be sponges, textured, porous, and organic with infinite surface area. And a bioreceptive material like loofah, the material we're using here for this installation, could be designed to catch and host microbes with tiny cavities of different sizes and shapes that create different pockets of shade, temperature, moisture, airflow, and nutrients. With walls of a bioreceptive material, architecture can become and be thought of as a cloud to nourish humans. And in turn, buildings become stewards for the microbiome. Just as we already know and think a lot about these days, just as our healthy gut microbiome contributes to our individual health, a healthy urban microbiome might promote our collective health. And a new kind of living architecture might involve what we could call probiotic buildings. A holobiont is a collection of diverse species living symbiotically, each contributing to the well-being of the whole. The humans, microbes, and other organisms in the holobiont are mutually supportive. And in this way, we are all made of each other. This gives us a new way of thinking about multi-species architecture. In the future, buildings with porous surfaces could behave like our skin and gut and support colonies of microbes tuned to create healthy spaces organically and inexpensively. The buildings that result might look very different than the ones we currently inhabit, opening doors to new ways of thinking about how we live and how our cities are organized. Humans are the microbes of the city. And with microbes, as with humans, diversity is the key to well-being. So to design for diversity is to design for living together and to design for our collective future. Thank you.
David, I found my pulse quickening, and it's impossible not to react with the strongest of emotion and hope with the words that you've just shared. Thank you so very much for that extraordinarily important manifesto. It seems to me that this occasion is building because we build on Daniela and Tiziano's extraordinary soil and Nicola's example of activism and in gathering from the oceans and recombining and making new forms. And the term holobiont, I think, is perhaps one that could emerge as a key. I'm so very grateful for what you've said. I'm going to move and share some of my own work, and I do hope that this will complement what's been shown. Let me just start by acknowledging that I'm not alone, but on the contrary, that my own voice draws on a deep community. I'm here with my dear colleague Salvador Breed and his dear colleague and mine, Paul Holloman from 4D Sound. And they are part of a larger community, the Living Architecture Systems Group, which is trying to work from its home in Waterloo architecture, but with many circles around the world, on the possibility that architecture can be a new discipline and can be defined by living terms. Within the Toronto team, Timothy Boll, Michael Lancaster, Matt Gorbett have given extraordinary leadership along with so many others. And I want to point in particular to Warren DePriese and Nick Thornton Jones, who are extraordinary filmmakers that I'm going to be quoting and sharing in this presentation. Let me just give a little bio of them because of the significance of their work for this gathering. In the fashion world, Warren and Nick have created photography, film, and installations for Alexander McQueen, Iris Van Herpen, Thierry Mugler, Issa Miyake, and many others. And within music culture, Warren and Nick have collaborated with Uncle on their last 4 album projects, and Bjork on her last 3 album projects, and various Massive Attack projects. They were awarded the Grand Prix at Cannes for Bjork's groundbreaking virtual reality experience of Notgat. And naming those extraordinary colleagues, I am unable to mention many others, but I feel very, very grateful to be able to be in such a community. So colleagues, I'll just share a screen now. There, and I hope that's working now. I want to speak a bit more about the particular project of Grove at the Venice Biennale. It's founded on a fundamental sense, so beautifully painted by David just now, about the provocation that by speaking about who we are, how we can live together, we can define that very effectively by looking inside our own bodies, at our biomes, and thinking of how we can be effective hosts, and also by thinking about the fundamental kind of kinship with dimensions that are far beyond human species, with animals, with birds, with the oceans, with planetary forces as well, with mineral forces, with the dimensions high and low and wide that define our entire world, that run through us. This forms an architecture as well in which we can address the surroundings, which is profoundly inclusive. This work that I'm going to share, and now I'm quoting from Warren and Nick's beautiful film, Grove Cradle, which is at the heart of the Grove installation, is a rather hopeful one, which is unapologetically personal about beginnings of life. And it also embraces suffering, almost unspeakable suffering, because we are not living completely in happy times. We are living in times when the future is not certain and when we cannot honestly say that our future will sustain ourselves, that we will have a future, that we know what is happening. The sense of both tumbling and being so very hopeful at the same time is one that perhaps is worth acknowledging. So the installation at the Biennale tries to set out a public gathering space, Grove, perhaps at the beginnings of architecture, that is to say, in a forest underneath a cloud, looking into a well. It's based on many, many instances of sound and a rather resilient overarching canopy that's quite tough and that maybe is a contribution to a kind of a dissipative forms that can handle all kinds of storms, making an architecture out of an absolute minimum of material while being radically open. Rather than making walls, can we make resilient scaffolds that gather? The installation that I'm showing you here, the gathering space, with Danielle and Tiziano's beautiful work just behind it. It's wonderful to be your neighbor. Then carries a vision which is transformed into a film which projects another world. And I'm going to show some images from that world, from Grove Cradle, rather quickly, because you can see the elements that make up the larger Grove fabric, turning into a desert, flowing into a sense of apocalypse, in which there's a kind of an unspeakably dark sense of loss and of anxiety and of embrace, and then also embracing multiple cycles in which things start to stir and crystallize and acquiesce and comply and become liquid and move and start to move into concerts. Light stirs, motion stirs. The sense that things accumulating together can start to have a chorus is within this film. And without apology, a child grows as well, in presence, in touch, in intimacy, and again cycles again and again and becomes earth as well. Not easily, not even voluntarily, but necessarily. This sense of the multiple cycles and the deeply invested material qualities of it are ones that we hope that architecture can contribute to by working very explicitly with scaffolds, with the making of elements, the creation of soils, perhaps starting with the sense of suffering or loss of things being blown apart and being simply eviscerated, but then moving rather deliberately also into a sense of stirring, of the rather elusive quality that things can cohere. Perhaps it's possible to start to see some glimmerings of things and stirrings. Perhaps they relate to the beautiful scaffolding that David showed us naturally occurring, building itself in mycelium. And in that kind of scaffolding, we build and glimmer and oscillate and start to find phasing and antiphasing and chorusing in which multiple forms start to cohere and start to move into memory and touch and intimacy and the possibility of sharing as well. Not simply in a one-way flow, not simply in trying to claim a kind of domain in which the terrible past is behind us, but rather by allowing things to flow through our bodies so intensely and with such inclusion that death and suffering and life and blood and possibility all work together in a continuum. This kind of open-eyed quality of embracing life within the scaffolding of architecture is, I hope, a rather special contribution, one that's very committed to activism, one that's committed to materiality, one that's committed to hope and possibility. I'll just skip through a couple more images rather quickly to wrap up, but I hope you can see the way the cycling works within this film and the vision then that resonates within the rather resilient scaffold that hangs over Grove. I wonder if you have a similar experience to mine in your own childhoods, because when I was brought up, I was taught that space was empty, that atoms were all incredibly tiny and separate, but that fundamentally that I should get used to with the idea that God is actually dead and that it's much, much better to stand in a world in which we see emptiness all around us, allowing things to somehow be void. That reality of a previous generation is one that I think has changed with extraordinary new visualization of what actually coheres. The surging developments just these past weeks at CERN in subatomic physics has revealed that entanglement is a reality, that things do cohere, that rather than calling space empty and a void, we would be much more accurate if we called it ether, of a deeply interconnected tissue in which possibility is always there. And so the kind of architecture of a stripped stage in which we try to articulate human freedom can, I think, be realized to also be very harmful in the sense of by trying to strip and build strong walls and clarity prematurely, we inevitably exclude some and privilege others. Is it possible to build open thresholds, which, like that beautiful term, holobiont, that David offered me, allows things to wash through us and yet be tough and intimate and above all, embrace life? So I hope that that might be a contribution to the way Grove participates with Hashim Sarkis's beautiful question, how will we live together? Thank you. Salvador, I wonder if you could join us now.
Yes, I can. Thank you so much for your wonderful words. I'm always so impressed when Philip is speaking. I mean, in a talk, but always when we have personal conversations, it's always. I always feel so inspired after his words. I think you probably have the same now. So I will working on Grove together with Warren and Nick and Philip was a very personal experience. I kind of was wearing two hats because in one way I was the composer, so I worked on creating the whole sound experience of the film, which is 15 minutes. And really grew out of conversations between the three or four of us that I think very much touched upon the topics that Philip just spoke upon, but also going more into kind of personal stories and how we relate to them and how we translate this into a story. So there's many very personal things that I will not speak of in this conversation, but are definitely part of the film for all of those who worked on it. So that's one part. The other part is that for some years now, I am collaborating with the Living Architecture Group, with my company, the company that I co-founded with Paul and two others, called 4D Sound, which is spatial sound technology, and that we used within Grove in the presentation, in the preparation, in the making process, and also with which we collaborated with the Living Architecture Group on developing the sound system itself that is being used inside the installation. So I can speak about both. I think it might be nice to first quickly go into 4D Sound to get a little bit of the kind of an idea of what we work on. I will share my screen. I think, 1 second. Is that working? Good. So in 2007, I was approached with 3 others to create, or actually to help an opera to create a piece. And this opera wanted to make use of spatial sound technology. So we went searching for things that we found could possibly be usable for this opera. It's an opera by Paul Oman about Nikola Tesla. And we quickly found out that the ideas that we got in conversations for this opera, which really consisted of placing sound in space, having reflections, having really speaking kind of in an architectural way about sound, were not available at all, and it was more like filling in spreadsheets as a technician. So we felt that we had to do something ourselves to fill in. So these were the first test sessions that we did in Amsterdam with the team, And we were looking for different ways, both in software and hardware, how we could spatialize software, both realistic, but also very much as an instrument. So really use the voices, but also the sounds that we have that we used within this composition, within the space, and being able to locate them very clearly and to have them interact with each other as normal instruments do. So for a lot of times when you're in a location, you perceive the music. So here's an instrument, there is an instrument, and you can walk to the instrument. Well, maybe not if it's in a concert location, but let's say you're it's in a room where you are free to move. You can actually move towards the instrument. You can walk around it. You can take a distance. You feel the space around it. It's all part of the experience of listening to a piece. But with amplified sound, that's of course very different, because we are used to listening to speakers that are actually speaking directly towards you in a kind of a very direct way, and we simulate stereo sound. We simulate space using stereo sound. And so what we wanted to do is really kind of break out of that box, or those two boxes if you speak of stereo, and really try to work in a way that felt natural in the combination with the actual space, being able to move space. So you see a space here, move space within the speakers, but also virtually go outside them, and being able to move a sound 100 meters away and move it really quickly to the other side, have things like Doppler effect and very natural occurring sounds happen if you do this. And by really focusing in the beginning to create a spatial sound environment that sounds really realistic, but then also taking the technology and being able to emphasize certain things, change certain things, so you create a surrealistic context in which maybe a person is not in the space once, but twice, or the space itself suddenly becomes a lot more rich in reverb. Or so that we were really kind of experimenting with these kind of things. And opera was really special because we had the singers inside the installation, and we had them amplified inside the space. The sounds were actually following the singers. And when they spoke really soft, we made sure that everybody in the space could hear them like they were really close. But if they were singing really loud, the sound had to be really focused around them. So we used also these kind of dynamics to create a space that was both a platform to recreate existing music, to mix music as it is, and as you see more often, but also going a lot further and seeing really space as part of composing itself and using the spatial element. So moving forward, a few spaces were opened, which this is Monom. It's a location in Berlin, which is dedicated to researching spatial sound. What you see here is really like a space that we, in collaboration with the people of Monom, really refined to create an optimal space for sound recreation. And it's both a place for research for artist residents, but also sometimes in the weekends the venue opens and people come here, and this can be both more traditional concerts, so people go in for an hour, listen to music, but often the musician or the producer is not there or is free to move through the space. And what we also really found is that social behavior changes when you don't have a very clear stage. So again, if you move to stereo, you have a very clear stage. Everybody moves their focus to that stage, and this is the kind of concert. But when you, for example, we had many times where we had a composition made inside this piece, And the composer, this was an electronic piece. I have to think of Murkov, a Barcelona-based composer, who created a piece which consisted both of electronic and recorded acoustic sounds. And because the sounds were everywhere in the space, actually circles started to happen around the center of this sound system, and people were sitting around the center, but there was nothing in the center except the idea of that there was a center. So it's interesting to see also socially this has a really big impact on behavior. Throughout these artists working inside this space, and also coming from all different backgrounds, so it's electronic music, it's classical music, and also using acoustical instruments, amplifying them, delaying them, placing them elsewhere. We learned a lot about the way artists want to use sound, and how to create tools that both create flexibility but still work very intuitive, because the danger with these kind of technologies, because it is a technology, is that it becomes very technical very soon, and that's something we do give access to the engine, how we call it, the thing that runs this machine, but at the same time we offer tools that are as simple as just moving your hand and the sound moves with it, and having someone play this live and really responding, and not having to do anything about, not even being it's quite clear that it's a technological development, but as a musician it has to be as intuitive as possible. So this is the Symphonic sound system. This is the biggest system that we have built so far at Funkhaus in Berlin. And we use this system. It was kind of a crazy project. I think there's more than 4 kilometers of wire going through this space, and going through all the speakers. The boxes on the floor are the subwoofers, and as you can see, there's omnidirectional speakers throughout the whole space in a matrix. So something things that we could do here is really stretches up to an enormous scale, and being able to both come very close to people, but also create something grand. And yeah, just being in this is the space is by origins a recording studio in the east of Berlin for orchestras. And so acoustically, it was kind of a dream to do that kind of things here, and to have people work here. And so a fantastic project. So now the connection to the Living Architecture Systems Group. Conversation. I was already composing before introducing 4D Sound to this group. I was already composing with Philip on sounds and soundscapes for his installation. I could say compose, but it was quite a special project, and in which we really worked on very small systems that generated sound, which worked interactively. And so by having all these small modules throughout the space, it created the sound, for example, by the vinegar batteries that were in the space, but also by movements. And so this process of exploring together was already happening. And at some point, my world of spatial composition and the work that we were doing with Philip really started to come together, which was quite a different approach, because in a way the artist in a sound piece was kind of God. You have complete control. You can control all the pyramid. You can say, I want the space to be this rich. I want a sound there. I want a sound there. It's very, you have all kind of ultimate control over the space. Whereas with the installations with Philip, this approach was very much bottom down. It was all about small systems that work together to recreate fields. And so I found it very scary to bring those worlds together. And I think for the last 4 years now, I think maybe 5, we have worked together into creating kind of hybrid systems where sensors are there and local systems are going on, but at the same time there is kind of a control over the whole system, and that enables me also to kind of create longer compositions in which I have a lot more control. So I can say, well, these moments are very silent and certain sounds can play, and other moments are much more kind of overwhelming and very powerful. And so this is really where Grove is kind of, for me, a very special project because it's one of the first projects. Well, we worked on a completely new software package that we used for this installation for the first time. So that was special for me as 4D sound, but also to be able to work in such a narrative compared to previous installations where people are completely free to explore, and so the pieces are interactive. So you have to be kind of aware of that while composing, because you can't just kind of force people into something. You have to be responsive as well. Where here I could make much bigger gestures, and because I felt this piece, and now comes the composer inside me, because with Grove, because it was such a personal and it's really telling. Of course, it's a story about everyone, but for us as well, it's really a personal, emotional story about many things. And I think because Grove has this filmic quality to it, that came much more upfront, and it was much more, even more so than before. It came out of the conversations that we three had. One thing, so that's kind of the 4D sound. One thing that I wanted to show that I think is interesting in connection to architecture, because it kind of speaks to people in a visual language, is Tracer. I will shortly go to another window if that works. Tracer. I have to stop share here. Yeah, sorry, it's just here. So Tracer is a virtual reality tool that enables you to, this is actually not, I will just speak of it. It's a tool. This space that you see below is the SSI. It's another space in Budapest, which we do a lot of research in. This tool enables people to actually physically draw movements through the space and place sounds on them. So in terms of composition, it's not a very flexible tool. It's more a proof of concept of being able to work in a VR environment on sound, and having the flexibility to really visualize things and hear them, which really help as a composer to understand what you're doing. I think this would be the ideal way. At the moment, we're working mostly with Ableton Live, which is a composition tool that is kind of a normal two-dimensional linear DAW workstation for audio. But this is kind of an idea of what it could go to in the future when we would have a spatial composition tool inside. You see in the bottom here the person working on it, bottom right. I don't know if you can see this. So next to okay, I stopped sharing again. Sorry. Next to doing this in virtual reality, I also worked on an installation with the artist Nick Verstand, who I often collaborate with. And we created something connected to this VR project, which was a physical string made of lasers inside a big warehouse space, in which we were able to kind of pluck and push and pull the string. I will press play now. We're able to, you can see the visualization here. We're able to, I think there's a better moment here at the end of the, yeah. We were able to move the sounds through the space, and actually they were triggering different elements. And this was a composition that really started as very harsh, kind of linear, very direct connection, very technical, but in the end, as you can see, it really felt like fabric. And one of my favorite moments of the piece is actually when the end part is very alive and it's completely kind of drawing you in. It's completely believable that is a very tactile thing that is communicating with you. But at the end part, it suddenly completely drops and it's completely empty in that hall. And that's actually one of the most beautiful moments, because it's kind of, it's really kind of showing how we relate to something and how we experience it. Both sound and visual are to me felt so physical that this empty moment kind of was a realization for people, wow, that what they were actually in. So for me, this was a really great project that kind of researched this space between virtual and real. So I think that's about it. I think
Thank you so much, Salvador. Colleagues, we do have a little time where we can share some comments and discussion. I guess we'll wrap up in about just a little over 15 minutes in order to give time for the Digital Futures and Inclusive Futures sessions and discussion as well. I wonder if I could just introduce a question and ask if each of the presenters could respond a bit, which is about the kind of extraordinary cellular fabric that I see each of you working with. It seems to me that one of the questions of how we can live together, how we will live together, is what kind of specific geometric structures and what the units are that make the tissues and the soils and the flesh of our world as being a fundamental kind of contribution that architecture can make. And it makes me very, very curious about what particular size and organization and topology makes up these tissues, the things that resonate with us, the things that hold us, the things that allow things to pass through us. I've got a couple of examples. I've got a 2,000-year-old brick here. It's a piece of opus reticulatum taken from a field discovered in the aqueducts in Rome. And it would be an oversimplification to call this tough and intense. It's actually made of volcanic tufa and it hardened. But let's say at least that it made a kind of tradition of stereotomy. That is, very precise individual bricks that put things together part to part to part to part and built a Western world. Something we're experimenting with is a different kind of unit like this, where you see that each of these little cells, rather than being tough and hard, is deliberately compliant and can expand and contract and still holds itself together, but is really very deliberately almost fragile and yielding and interconnected, a rather different sense of how the cells of our fabrics that make up the tissues, that make up the building blocks, that make up the firmament, that make up the world are made of. And this applies, I think, even to the cells of space, Salvador, that you're working with, because I see kind of like a 3-meter array. And sometimes you work in Cartesian modes, which means that, okay, it's actually very helpful for it to be kind of a pure crystal. And then at the same time, we see the extraordinary soil of Tiziana and Daniela, in which there's this writhing kind of Dionysian sense of the underground. So I find this question very curious. Is there a contemporary kind of common geometry or a cellular tissue that we might say offers promise as a contemporary fabric for building our world? Nicola, for example, you work with very pure geometries, and yet they move into this extraordinary kind of interlacing geometry. Could you comment on the geometry that you use?
Yeah, I would like to sort of expand a little bit your question and talk about and employ one of the terms that you have been employing just now, that is fragility. That is something that I've been thinking about quite often recently, because there is this thing that it's as human. Okay, if you watch a natural system are really fragile, and it is a way that they actually evolve. They evolve. You know, they die, they burn, they grow, they decay in a really quick way. And so fragility, it's part of our ecosystem, and it's part of sustainability within the natural system. As human being, it's really strange because the function is fragile, and that I explain a little bit better. So the products that we buy, that we consume, are fragile because we need to consume, to buy, to sustain our economy. But actually the material that is behind, that is actually the substantial part of what we buy, it's not fragile at all. It's very often, again, it's made of materials like plastic, in this case, since it relates to my project, that can last for 100 years, and very, very often that we employ like just once. So I think that as human beings, we really have a broken relation with the fragility. So what we really need, it's fragile in terms of function, because we need to, again, buy and consume. And what we don't need, so our waste, is not fragile at all. It becomes almost immortal. And I think that we should really think about more about the way and the meaning of fragility, and what is fragile in our inhabitation, in the way we live, in the way we inhabit one architectural space, and so on.
That's really interesting, and I really appreciate, Nicola, both the tangibility and practicality of your work, but also the kind of beauty and aesthetics of it as well, which I should say for all of the people on the panel and the presentations. One of the things you're making me think about is this concept of anti-fragility. You know, speaking of fragility, the concept of anti-fragility is more or less like a response to resilience and going a little further. So, you know, it's sometimes described if resilience is this concept, you know, that we've been increasingly thinking about for sustainability, where you kind of respond to stress and like can build back, or, you know, the idea of anti-fragility goes further and says, actually, there are a lot of systems, including potentially the built environment, parts of the built environment, that could kind of flip that on its head and say, actually, they want stress. A lot of systems want stress and get better with stress. So it's not that like the stress should be resisted. It's not that we should like get damaged and build back quickly. It's that we should make systems, materials, to your question, maybe Philip, like units, bricks, that that actually get better with stress. They invite it, they improve their like, and not to go too far on that track, but I think that's it's really an interesting way to think about you know, learning and change, and then how do you apply that to the built environment and bricks? Could you have bricks that actually get better with stress? Sounds kind of weird, but you know, human bones, for example, well, all mammals' bones, you know, they need stress. You know, like we all know, like if you don't walk around for a long time, your bones get weaker, and if you run, parts of your bones, you know, if you run a lot, like marathons, parts of your bones like get better, get stronger and denser. One other quick thought, I guess, Philip, as always, you have these great kind of provocative, mind-expanding frameworks and questions. About your question about the unit, I was wondering, like, if we need different things at different scales, because I was thinking, like, all the work today is a little bit like, it has units and bricks, but it also has, like, maybe we could call a more zoomed in scale, like the material itself, that like, whether it's molecular or cellular, but, you know, actually zooming into the brick, like what are the layers and components? And then it has the brick, and then it has like the building or the built environment, or, you know, architecture. Something that I've been thinking about for materials, which I guess is mainly the brick scale, is that there's this movement that I feel in this event today of like, materials could actually be textured rather than smooth. They could be non-uniform rather than uniform. They could be living rather than sterile. And maybe most importantly, they could be dynamic rather than static. And maybe that's where the anti-fragile thing comes into me. It's like, could materials actually get better over time based on their context, on their living capacity, on their self-healing, and, you know, tuning themselves more, like those great sensors in the robot and in, Philip, your work, that are responsive. Could materials, could bricks be responsive, and therefore they're improving over time? So I think that's already a really exciting trend in the whole built environment and architecture and all these amazing presentations today. But I'm wondering, could that same thing be said for all the scales, for materials? Should materials be dynamic rather than static? And then on the small scale, and then on the large scale, should buildings be dynamic rather than static? I think yes, actually, for buildings. But it's interesting. I wonder if we need slightly calibrated approaches for the different scales or not.
I think from our side, I mean, I think there are two important things. I mean, the first one is the shared agency of the designs that we're doing. So we don't have 100% control of the forms or shapes that are generated. First, because of the time, which means our structure gets stronger over time, but our structure also changes over time. And also the question, how can we design in a way that allow other species to thrive in our architecture? And we have this question in this project, but also in another project we're doing in Vienna, where we're working with bacteria. But the same questions: how can we allow a fertile ground for any other subject that is not us? And for the Magic Queen, it's quite interesting because we tried to generate something where you not immediately recognize the materiality of the architecture. And by that, actually, we created something that people need to rediscover, which means they need to redefine what they understand as a natural material. It's not necessarily what they think of when they think of soil. And that is quite interesting because a lot of the audience, a lot of the people who see it are confused. And this is quite beautiful, and it's a strong way of redefining what we understand as nature. Because they, by having the moment of confusion, you allow the people to actually rediscover what it means to have an organic material. And I think in that way, it's very important as architects to think on the spatial qualities that we're designing with, allow people to rediscover. That was one of the reasons why we called it Magic Brain, was that it's something new. It's almost like a species you need to meet, you need to understand in a way. So I think everything has to be, like we really try to be very sensitive when it comes to all these geometrical questions, because everything influences the way you perceive the environment as a visitor. And I think that's something super important, because especially when we are designing not just geometries, objects, but actually whole environmental conditions. It means everything that is there, the sound, the smell, the geometry, the touch, influences how you perceive it and how you can find yourself within this environment. So it's not just geometry in our case, it's also the smell, the touch, and the ever-changing perception that the person can have to it, and to be able to rediscover it over a longer period. It cannot be immediately understood, and that's something that's important, this moment of perception that is longer than our usual short span of attention, and it's something you have to spend time with to get to know. And I think that's something that we're really trying to do, and that we see, especially with living systems, that it really takes time. Living systems have different time spans than human time spans, and this understanding of the shifting of time, almost time zones between other living systems. Might be a grass that grows over 6 months, might be a mushroom that takes way longer, till you start to understand what is happening. So interactivity becomes something that has to be experienced over and outside the human.
Maybe I can pick up on this quite very shortly. Just what, of course, there is really the deep desire to lose control of over geometrical constraints, no? The constraints that we really set as a humans. No? And the way how we understand this is by overlaying a series of almost like geological events. No? This is kind of I think our structures they're always the result of a concatenation of events, you know, that spans through time, but as well spans through media, effectively. You know, as well in the work of David, but as well in the work of Salvador with Philip, there is this kind of extension of this kind of geological event through different media. So this is something that. Yeah, also point out, I think.
I can't resist offering a reflection as well, because what I'm hearing is some offerings here that could, I believe, move together towards a manifesto. It's very tantalizing, because I hear Nicola speaking about fragility, but this seems opposite to what a Western education would speak of when we say fragility, as if it's weak and irresponsible and the germs will come in, or simply crime will prevail. But what I'm reminded of is Gandhi's creed of nonviolence, in which you refuse to take the gun and to use the bullet and to kill. You refuse this kind of violence, and yet you are pretty tough, you know? I mean, you'll hit back and you'll wrestle and you'll really be a pain, you know? I mean, like the kind of tenacity and the intensity and the strength of that kind of nonviolence is one that involves wrestling and deep involvement. And it does not speak of something which is fatal, which just speaks of annihilation, or a kind of irresponsibility where you let the germs in. Okay, I don't use protection. I simply give up. It's a remarkable kind of sensibility where I think that we really need more language, and it suggests to me that in a Western conception of the materials, these beautiful cellular fabrics that I think each of you are offering, there may be something that is different than the kind of classical three phases of water. Okay, we either have ice crystal, or else we have liquid and completely fluid, or else we have gas, as if those are three pure different kinds of elemental states. The fourth phase of water, which is that of colloids and gels and gelatins, and the kind of spatial qualities that come out of that, the manifolds, the extracellular matrices, the kind of intermediate, curiously viscous states, are ones that I feel like have been painted very vividly in each of the presentations to date. And this makes me think that perhaps there is a very deep material offering to the question of a new soil in perhaps that fourth phase of water, that is the colloidal or the intermediate matrix. I wonder whether this is perhaps a step towards the really intriguing question that I hear Daniela asking about how something can be truly open and dynamic and wash through us, where growth in life is embedded in the essence of the thing rather than just a reference for something else.
If you want, I can briefly answer. Then I'll just would like to pose a question to Salvador afterwards, because it's, but yeah. First of all, the reference to Gandhi is, again, we are keeping on overlapping, I guess. I love the fact that you use the word fragility, because again, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. And then now that you talk about Gandhi, again, it's incredible, you know, it's a coincidence, because I'm using less and less the word sustainability, and I'm starting using more and more the word ethics, because I don't know actually if you can really succeed as human being in becoming sustainable. But I know that in terms of ethics, we cannot stop trying to be sustainable. So that's one thing that I wonder. I wanted just to add to your question. The other thing is that, you know, I've been always been interested in, probably we have been talking in past years in decadence, in the French decadence, and in the French poets and Baudelaire and so on. And there is Paul Bourget was the person that is a writer and the critic, and he employed for the first time the word, and he defined decadence for the first time while talking and describing the work of Baudelaire, and it was saying a decadent style, because it was talking about narrative and poetry, is when a page breaks down to leave space for to the independence of when a book breaks down to leave space for the independence of the page, when the page breaks down to leave space for the independence of the sentence, when the sentence breaks down to leave space for the independence of the word. And it's not when everything is completely broken, and it's not even when everything is a complete whole. It's, as you were saying, the stage in between, the threshold, when you have at the same time the individuality of the component and the persistence in some way of the system. You have both. And decadence is not only related to decay, so when one thing is slowly crumbling down, but decadence is also the opposite. When from decay, something starts growing, it's not completely evolved. So again, we come back to this really interesting situation of coexistence between something that is slowly decaying and breaking down and acquiring, and the small parts that are acquiring independence, and also the system that perhaps is growing from that new independence. And last, yeah, I'm going to pose the question afterwards.
Well, colleagues, I know that we should wrap up rather shortly. We've had some very interesting questions come in through social media as well, and I apologize for us not being able to cover all of them, but I'm going to raise one that perhaps continues this discussion just for a couple more minutes. Akshada Deshmukh asks, can there be a scenario where architecture can actually be living and growing and interacting with humans all at the same time? How can this actually be done?
Maybe I can start with that. I mean, all these things, I think that all people here in this panel are doing is trying to go small steps towards this. And I think it takes a lot of patience. But all these experiments are absolutely important to start to understand this complexity. Nature had a lot of time to develop, and I think the goal is in front of us, and it's I think it's absolutely possible. But we need to start to change the way we think. We need to embrace complexity, and this is something that in architecture we used to simplify things. And when we are designing for living systems, we need to accept complexity and embrace complexity and embrace how complicated things are. And I think this is something that takes time, and sharing of knowledge and sharing of how things are done on a scientific level, and broadening our architecture community by including scientists from different field experts. I think this is the best possible way. And on the long run, it's something that we highly believe will happen in small steps, and at one point we hopefully will reach it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's really beautifully put. I mean, I would just add that in addition to taking small steps and like you said, so importantly, designing for complexity, which alone would be a huge kind of transition for the way we typically thought about architecture and education and the role of designers and control. But maybe also just to add to that, and you already mentioned uncertainty, kind of designing for multiple time horizons. You know, that's something that's fairly straightforward to say and think about, but probably pretty hard to do. But we could say that even long before we get to the actual livingness of materials and any advances in biology, that buildings have always been changing, you know, in terms of their program, in terms of their aging, in terms of the decay of materials. But we often don't design for that decay. And we often only design for the moment, you know, we're even trained, design for the program, you know, that you're given. You get a list of the various programs that need to be in the building, the uses, and you design for those. What about thinking about what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years? What are other trends? What are other possibilities? How can you design flexible and open-ended systems, materials, etc. So I'm designing for multiple timeframes, but also, as many people in the panel have brilliantly brought up, designing for multiple species. You know, recognizing and welcoming the role that other species have in architecture, and again have always been there, but we can kind of enhance those. So I think we can start calling out a couple of these things. They're a little bit more riddles than exact, you know, steps or classes, but designing for complexity, designing for uncertainty, designing for multiple time horizons, designing for multiple species. That can start to point us in the direction of how to call out some new possibilities.
Well, colleagues, maybe this is a time to draw things to completion. I feel that the contributions today are steps towards a manifesto of the kind of intermediate architecture that can, in fact, come alive. Nicola, your sheer activism in this project with Parley for the Oceans, as well as the exquisite iconography that you've demonstrated, are both such profound contributions. And Daniela and Tiziana, the kind of queen monster that is in the bars in the Arsenale is a kind of exquisite cyborg to my mind. I mean, exactly occupying a new fundament that constitutes our world. David, your provocation of the holobiont, I think, is such a tangible kind of contribution to new language. It seems like an extraordinarily important one, and absolutely directly, explicitly enacted with the living materials that you're developing. And Salvador, I think that the kind of essay that says sound is literally architecture, that we are never alone, that energy washes through us, is such a moving contribution, both as a new technology, as a contribution to a building material, but also I think somehow the sense of the meticulous embroidery of locating things and combining things with such inclusion allows the kind of quality of mutual relations and empathy, which allows us to move towards the kind of ethics that I think Nicola is invoking. So I feel very, very grateful for the kind of imagination and inspiration, and also the open-eyed kind of practical activism that this panel has contributed. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for inviting.
Thank you, Philip.
Very much enjoyed it.
Everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
So we'll be just continuing for a little brief moment, just because we want to have some questions and things. Well, Philip, just let me say one thing. I'm lost for words by the exquisite work. I mean, I feel that jaw-droppingly beautiful, but also kind of incredibly powerful from an ethical perspective. I'm reminded of the title of the Biennale, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe more. Less aesthetics, more ethics, and actually, we have both today. I think Nicola's work was a real incredible combination of exquisitely beautiful, powerful, but all of the work was really, really astonishing. So I just really want to thank you for. It was a kind of a session that spoke for itself and was incredibly powerful. And it just struck me that in some ways, what you did was respond in the most incredible way to the provocation that Hashim Sakis made. And of course, he wasn't to know that the pandemic was going to hit. And he wasn't to know that, of course, we'd be in the situation that we're in the moment. But it struck me as amazing that so people often criticize this technology as being something that maybe divides us. I'm reminded of Sherry Turkle's book, Alone Together, where she speaks about this kind of moment. And we all know this, where people are in a room supposedly being together, but they're all checking their cell phones and mobile phones and whatever. But it struck me there's a flip side of that. And in fact, in some ways, her title should have been Together Alone. Everyone was together, but actually they were alone. Whereas here on this platform, we are genuinely alone, but together. And I think that's an amazing, amazing thing. And I think what is also astonishing, so it's a really kind of vindication of the possibilities of what we can do with this platform in real time to link people up across the world in the most astonishing way. There's Philip in Cambridge, in Canada, myself in Venice, in California, and Nicola and many others in Venice, in Italy itself. It's an amazing thing. But I think the question about what you've raised today was an amazing series of challenges in many ways about what it is to live together. And that's not only just living architecture, which I think is really, I completely agree. It's become its own kind of discipline in a way. It's really come of age in a way, in a very challenging and provocative way with all this work. But it's also the way in which kind of it's showing that we are ourselves part of our architecture in a way, and it is part of us. I think that the David Benjamin's sort of comment about that was really profound. So at all sorts of different sort of levels, it's kind of like it's showing us how we can live together and live together with our architecture, to live together with our living architecture. And a really, really powerful thing. And I also think, just a one kind of comment, Hashim Sarkis comes from a part of the world which has been subject, as we all know, in recent days to the most horrific divisions. And I think, we still need to strive to live together in many ways. But this is an example of this, a kind of camaraderie, a collegiality, a collaboration that really shows the possibilities of what it is, not just to use these platforms, but also to pursue the ethical life. And I just want to thank you all for this amazing presentation. It's something that itself will carry on living. One thing we always upload these videos onto YouTube, and they often get many more hits afterwards than they get at the time. There have been 1,000 users, I say, in China alone today, and many others across the world. So, but thank you everyone so much. This has really been wonderful. I'm of course immensely jealous that I'm not there in Venice with Nicola having a Bellini and Harry's bar or whatever it is, and with all the rest of you there. But can I just commission you to have one for me on my behalf? But thank you. And I think that this is not, when we kind of finish these sessions, I think it's almost like it's not the end. It's kind of the beginning of something new. And I think you guys have charted out a new kind of a territory of ethical responsibility for architects today, and not just architects. I mean, we're all architects in different sort of ways, but which is really important. And so it's it's not, you're not just responding to I think that Hashim Sarkis thing, how do we live together? How should we live together? But also to the earlier one, less aesthetics, more ethics. It's a really wonderful presentation. So thank you, everyone. I just want to take up a few minutes for our viewers across the world, just to go and point out, or just to show them a few things about how the whole presentation, that about the whole inclusive futures thing. Now, I will just simply say one thing, and that is that we don't have many questions today, which is a good thing, because I think in many ways that that everything is kind of straightforward. But what I will say, this is the website, and as you can see, these little boxes here, you can click on them: the lectures, the conference, the workshops, how to apply, and facts. This, I think, is fairly straightforward, frankly. So this is the one that you need to look at. And what I will say is, this is the important date. This time tomorrow, or when we started our session today, 24 hours tomorrow at 10 a.m. EST, the applications will open. Now, please don't panic, because you have until the 31st of May to upload to make your applications, and then you will get your results by the 8th of June. Also, there are details here on how you upload your information, how you register an account. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but it's there on the website. There are a series of questions here, frequently asked questions, which basically get run through this kind of question. Yes, you do have to apply for these workshops if you want to be on the Zoom connection, and you do have to put in a certain amount of samples of your work. We had a long, agonizing discussion about whether we should ask for too much information, but in the spirit of inclusive futures, we are just simply saying the work itself. We don't want you to be our decisions be influenced by any of your profiles and your backgrounds and so on. We want to keep it completely open and platform. You can apply. Every student can apply for, or architect can apply for 3 workshops, but you can only participate in one of those. Having said that, you also have the possibility of watching the live stream of other sessions itself. So if you can't get into some of them, there are plenty of workshops that you can get to. And many of them will be live streaming. We will certainly be highlighting the key ones, and there will be a number of large scale ones. There will be ones that for example, I'm teaching one with Sanford Quinter, which is a theory workshop. There's one on inclusivity, and there's going to be one on neuroscience. that will be able to host a lot of people. You won't get a certificate if you're just following the live stream, but you will if you're registered as for the Zoom account in it. And then here are the workshops themselves, and they're not all here yet, but I can tell you that this is astonishing number of workshops. They're going to be about 120 eventually on this site here. They're still loading here. And you can. There are a series of things here. You can see the different subjects. I'm going to put on artificial intelligence because I think this is astonishing that we have so many on artificial intelligence. 15, almost 20 sessions on architecture. There's going to be 20 because there's going to be one in Turkish. And what I also find amazing, if you look at this, the different languages that these are going to be in. This is going to be in Chinese. There's also going to be some, I assume this one's going to be in Spanish. I can't see exactly now. There's going to be one in Russian and so on. And that is incredible in itself. Then we have, basically, most of them are online. There are a few hybrid workshops. These hybrid workshops are ones that are going to be taking place where you're going to get fabrication happening in China and also in Egypt, but where you can go online for itself. So this one, for example, is a one with Roland Snooks in Australia. This one is also from Australia. Nick Bow, my colleague here. Virginia, who's part of our team, is running one. So that's that. There are different types of workshops, and then the languages are just to my mind astonishing. I'm going to put in down Arabic. I don't know. I haven't seen this, but there's one in Arabic. I want to sort of see Farsi in English. It's the first time we have one in Farsi. I think there's some in Portuguese and Russian for the first time, which is wonderful to see. Thank you, Maria, and happy birthday also to also, it's Anya's birthday. Maria was yesterday, and Indonesian. So this is part of our inclusivity, and then finally the time zone. The reason why this is important is that they have been offered at certain times around the 24-hour clock. Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and just to say, Africa is an important part of what we're dealing with. We're opening up to as well. And thank you, Ahmed, for being our looking after Africa, North and South America. This is. I mean, I never quite expected to have something like this. It's fabulous to see. So I don't know if there are any questions that have come in about this. Just to say also, let me just finally say this, that there's a conference here, which there's full details haven't been uploaded and yet. Also the lectures, this is what I was talking about earlier on. We have this thing called the Digital Consortium, a doctoral platform where we're bringing everyone together across the world. And we're kicking off with Slavoj Žižek. He is the most astonishing individual. I mean, a colleague of Philip and mine at the European Graduate School, the most charismatic, entertaining, insightful, intelligent person I know. It's absolutely amazing. And then we move on to this, the architecture and philosophy. And it seems that Canada has a particular presence, Philip. We have Erin Manning, who is an amazing person in her own right. Sanford Quinto, also from Canada. And Ana Maria Duran Callisto, who comes from Ecuador. This is about architecture and philosophy. I will be having a series of discussions in my The Hitchhiker's Guide to Artificial Intelligence. Refik Anadol, Wan Yu He, Daniel Bolodan, Theodoros Galanos, and many others will be joining me for that particular week. This is going to be a different time. It's going to be in the evening in America, in the morning in China. It's going to be a bit late in Europe, but we'll upload all the material afterwards. We then have a performance-based thing, a series that Philip is organizing with Akim Menges, Philip Block, Meta Thompson, and so on. It's really going to be an incredible thing. So we have all these happening, and I think it's fairly self-explanatory. I don't know whether we've got any particular questions that we need to address here, but I would say that we're not complete. The workshops are not complete yet. So you don't need to rush to go and apply for these things. There's no point necessarily in in just rushing ahead to get your name there, because you might as well take your time and wait and see if there are going to be other workshops that you need to address. I don't know whether Gustavo wants to add anything about this to this. First of all, I want to just say that this comes as a result. This is like an iceberg, right? I mean, what you see on the surface, there's 90% or whatever it is beneath the surface in terms of the work that's gone on. And there has been an astonishing amount of work by our incredibly dynamic and enthusiastic team. We are a team. There's no one person in charge. We're all working together. We're all equal. And everyone is a volunteer, which is an amazing thing in its own right. What we're trying to do is to kind of revolutionize education, to democratize education, and make everything available for everyone around the world. I mean, for too long, we've had an elitist system whereby only those who have the money can afford to go to the top schools. We want to share that knowledge, and share that knowledge not just on a weekly basis through Digital Futures, through your amazing contributions today, but also through having workshops where people can find out about things. And these workshops will be recorded. They'll be uploaded onto our YouTube thing. So they'll be there as a permanent repository of information. It's going to be, I mean, this is going to be, we're trying to change things. What we're trying to do, I would say, is to change education in the way that Uber has forced the taxi industry to improve its operations. That's the end game there. Gustavo, can I invite you to maybe say a few things if you would like to?
Yes, thank you, Neil, for summarizing what is happening. I am very excited to be a part of the organizing team. I would say that we're the team, all the regional managers are at attention. We're constantly looking at email and social media to answer questions. I think the website was carefully done and considered. And if there's any further questions, please address them directly to the info@DigitalFutures email address. But it seems like you covered everything, Neil, and we're still updating the website as we go. And we're still looking at all the other possibilities to improve and to highlight and to further extend the reach of this education as a human right. And I think that's it, Neil. So thank you for summarizing everything. And again, we're available for anyone that has any questions, and we're here for you.
Well, I think just one thing I will say, and that is to say that the deadline is going to be on May the 31st. So let me just share my screen one more time and put some of these important things up here. One second, I can't think if I can get onto my screen here. I can't do that, sorry. Yes, so tomorrow everything opens. You have to submit everything by May the 31st, again at the same time. But there will be many more workshops that will be added. Well, not many more, but there'll be several more workshops that can be added over the next few days. So don't panic. Tomorrow it opens. You have to submit your choices by May the 31st. I guess there's a question for you, Gustavo. If one person, you can only, if you make a submission, can you change it? I guess not.
No, you cannot change it. So it's very important that you select carefully, and you might get your selection. So you cannot make changes, correct?
Yes. So there's little point in rushing ahead to make your selection tomorrow when you might as well hold back until you've had a chance to look at everything, and you'll be selected on a complete level playing field. You'll be judged on the work itself, and anyway, and you will be able, even if you don't get in, you'll be able to watch other workshops on the live stream. I think that's about all that we can need to say today.
Neil, I just wanted to ask you a question. Why is this such an important initiative in the discipline of architecture? Why are we doing this? Because I know why, but maybe everyone needs to hear why. You know,
I would say there are two things that have kind of hit me in my career as an educator. One was when I was teaching in Dessau, where education was almost free, which was fantastic. And we had students from all over the world. We had students, and they lived together. Israelis and Palestinians were on the same course. We had people from all the poor countries in the world, from Nicaragua, from Bangladesh. And what I began to realize is that the top 2% in any country is talented, and most of these students have been offered places at the AA and elsewhere, but they couldn't afford to go. That's one thing. I realized that actually there's talent everywhere, and it's not dependent on you actually necessarily having gone to the top schools. And the second thing I'd say was that when we opened up our discussion last year, this theory workshop with Sanford Quinter, Marika Trotter, and Antoine Picon, which was an amazing thing. The first thing, you had to mute everyone. But before everyone had muted, there was a guy who kind of said, "Hi, Professor, I'm in Lima, Peru." And that just hit me. That there was someone in Lima, Peru, and we were kind of reaching out. And we don't want to see this in terms of center and periphery, but rather as a kind of global network where we're all together. And that's partly why we have these sessions at the time we do, because that's when we can embrace as many people around the world. It means me getting up very early in California, but it means that we can catch people in most countries. So I'm just in heart. Can I just thank Philip once more for today's session? Really, really fabulous work. I mean, wonderful work. In fact, everyone today I was just blown away by it. So thank you so much. We will be uploading this onto our YouTube channel where you can continue to watch it. Are there any final comments today from anyone today?
No, I think we're good, Neil. You have the last word.
Well, the last word is thank you. And tomorrow the applications go live. Philip, I think maybe I should leave it with you for the last word. Would you like to say something?
Of course. The question of why digital futures is important is demonstrated by the waves of song and words and text and sheer action that are pouring out through this global movement. And it just seems so very important to build optimism in the face of unspeakable challenges. Not a false optimism, not one that papers over things, but that is clear-eyed and that gets fundamental things that we can do. What can we do? How shall we contribute? This forum is so very motivating, and I feel so very, very grateful to be part of it. Thank you so much for making it possible, Neil.
Thank you, Philip. Well, we're really grateful for putting this together. Thank you so much. Just one final kind of comment. Next week, we will be having a follow-up session with our regional managers talking about the workshops and so on before the final date for before applications close. Then we will be returning to Venice Biennale in 2 weeks' time when Claudio Pasquero, who is also working on a very similar theme, will be hosting another session. So next week Eric Goldenberg's session will be postponed, as we won't do that. We will have another session on the workshops, explaining them and going through them and answering questions and so on. So thank you, everybody. And Nicola, please have that Bellini for me, and we look forward to actually really being physically together at the Venice Biennale whenever that happens next time round, and I envy you being there. So thank you, everybody, and we will see you all again soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Take care. Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,